Imagine a flat earth realm hemmed in by the mystical Boreas of the Northwind. Under the scarlet light of a bloated, dying sun, its roiling seas spill eternal over the world's rim. Imagine a world in a perpetual state of decay, one populated by disharmonious men and women, hostile monsters and weird alien beings. Imagine a world inspired by the pulp tales and weird fiction of the 1930s, a setting of swords, sorcery, and weird fantasy. Welcome to Hyperborea. Today we're chatting with Hyperborea RPG creator Jeff Talanian. It was a pleasure chatting with him about how he got his start in role-playing games, how he transitioned as a writer, from collaborating with Gary Gygax to developing his own unique game, which has carved out an important niche in the OSR space. If this is the sort of content you enjoy, do consider subscribing. Almost 92% of my viewers are not subscribed. By doing so, it really helps the channel, and it's a free way to show your support. This ended up being a hearty conversation, so make sure you're stocked up on snacks, and let's get into it. So, my understanding with you is like you started with Homes, eh? That was your first introduction to the game?
Yeah, that was my first introduction to the game. I may have actually, the first time I played it, might have actually have been BX. But then my first owned version of D&D was Homes, which I got, a few weeks later after playing it the first time. And then that's what I ran from my neighborhood group of friends for a long time until we eventually transitioned into playing AD&D. I just had the Homes set. I had a paper route at the time, and I saved my money, and I eventually bought a Dungeon Master's Guide. Right. So I was running Homes with the Dungeon Master's Guide, and that's basically how we played. I'm sure we got everything wrong. I was a young teenager, and actually I wasn't even a teenager yet. I was a preteen. That's how we were running games. I was getting all the monster statistics from the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide, right? And the appendix that's back there. So that's where I was getting all the monster information from. Yeah. And in running modules.
How did you do levels, right? Because it caps at, Homes caps at 3. So how did you ever do levels beyond 3rd?
Well, eventually there was a kid in the neighborhood who picked up a player's handbook, and we used his book for a while because, we were all kids. We didn't have money. And so we used his book, and eventually I got my own. And from that point we were transitioning to AD&D.
Yeah, because I was wondering about that. So basically, when it got to a point of picking up some of the AD&D stuff, that felt like a natural transition into.
It did, but there were certain parts of it that we never changed out of Homes. For example, the way we did initiative back then. When I looked at the initiative rules in AD&D, my mind was just boggled by what was all these subcategories and deep explanations on the use of segments and
I still don't
all
understand
that stuff.
it.
And I was just like, I couldn't deal with it. It was just like made the guys go in the order of their dexterity, or sometimes roll a d6, and it was we just played.
I feel like the percentage of people who actually thoroughly understand AD&D DMG initiative is like very low. in terms of the whole hobby. It must be like less than 1%. I don't. I mean, I understand it in concept, but like in terms of actual execution and when things go and stuff, I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, roll a d6 or something.
Right. It's just so much easier that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you prefer a group initiative or individual initiative?
Usually, well, I usually run OD&D if I was doing a game, but with with the supplements, and then I have my own classes and stuff that I've written. So I would normally do group initiative. But I just leave it up to the players, like who wants to go first, what makes sense to them. So while it is group, there might be a strategic reason why the magic user might want to go first or last. So I'm not too worried about that. It kind of varies. It kind of varies, to be honest. It's like just what I feel like, because each game, and the other thing too is I do like running other systems. So it kind of depends on at the time what I'm running and how I want to approach it. So you went through this process of kind of learning AD&D. There was some stuff about Homes that you enjoyed, and then I guess if you're sort of thinking about
your journey kind of through the hobby, you presumably get to a point where you want to start doing some writing and game design.
Yeah, I kind of fell into it, really. I was a struggling fiction writer, and I was working on a novel, and I had some short stories under my belt, and I got a few things published in some like fanzine type stuff. And was working on a Greyhawk campaign in 2005, and I saw, as I was looking up stuff on Greyhawk online, I happened to bump into Gary Gygax's call for developers for his Castle Zagi stuff that he was publishing, which was, Castle Greyhawk with the serial numbers filed off. And so I said, "What the hell?" And I sent him a cover letter with some writing samples, and I was fortunate enough that he accepted me into his writing group, and that's how I broke into role-playing game writing. My friends always told me that I should, because I wrote all these volumes of stuff. I had binders full of house rules and everything else, and I never thought that I was good enough to be a role-playing game designer back then, when I was in my 20s and stuff like that. And when the opportunity arose and I fell into it, it was very fortunate and just kind of snowballed from there.
It's kind of interesting because I've always thought of you as a writer predominantly. Like, with game systems in particular, there seems to be two ways that they come across, right? There's either like it's very sort of simple, dry, and almost like a manual. And then there's kind of an approach where it's literature, like it's almost literature to that at that point. Like that, there's the way that it's written is purposeful. There's with your writing especially, I feel like there's kind of a like it's purposefully evocative. The words you choose are quite purposeful. Like it's not just like roll a d6 or this place is like windy. There's a lot more to it than that.
So for me, that's a struggle, because I try to sort of keep a careful balance of where I have the type of prose that I want to write for descriptive text, whether it's a class description, or if we're talking about someplace in the Hyperborea Gazetteer, if it's a land or a deity or some type of history, or say it's a celestial phenomenon, anything like that. I tend to get more descriptive in the type of prose that I choose to write. But when it comes to game mechanic type stuff, I try to be a little bit more terse. I think there's a time and a place to have florid prose. And there are certain places where, yes, it may read nicely, but how does it work at the game table? There's a lot of places where I strive to have an economy of prose.
I wonder too, like sort of going back to the Gary Gygax thing, I'm kind of wondering, because he's known for his certain style of prose, right? And so I'm wondering if he could resonate with that a little bit in his decision to choose you, just the way that you write and the way he might write.
Maybe. I would like to think so. It's funny, I never asked him why. I only presumed, because when I was working for him, I was working on, he was developing the Iggsburg area, which was kind of like the city of Greyhawk, but not. It was Gary's sort of new version of that, more like a very large town or a small city. And so I was developing a sector, and I made my deadline, and somebody else didn't make their deadline and then dropped off from the project, and I picked up their project, and I made the deadline that he put forth for me for that. And then it ended up turning into a few more assignments on that project that I was completing for him. So at the time, Gary was working with Rob Kuntz, and Rob was his longtime collaborator going back to the 1970s. They were co-DMs for Greyhawk. And Rob is a very creative, incredible mind. And but unfortunately, you get two alpha dogs like that, and they tend to butt heads on how they think a project should go. And so they had a parting of the ways, and Gary still wanted a co-author for the project, because he was working on his Legendary Adventures game. He was also working on 2-player card game called King of England, King of France, which was supposed to be a sort of card game that represented the 100 Years' War.
Right.
And so he was working on that. And so Castle Zagig wasn't necessarily his primary interest at the time. So he still wanted a co-author, or someone to write and develop his ideas. And he was, contributing writing himself, but I was more of the workhorse. So he tapped me to do it. I sort of presumed at the time, because I had completed so many other projects for him and I proved to be reliable, and I guess he liked my stuff.
Yeah. So I suppose it's probably a combination of things. It's like on the on a fundamental level, obviously you need to be able to complete stuff, and I imagine too, like what as you're talking, what it sort of prompted for me was, it might have given you a bit of an insight into how TSR might have worked with how they would have approached publishing things.
Yeah.
I was thinking,
definitely.
I was thinking specifically of, say, Unearthed Arcana or Oriental Adventures or something like that. Maybe sort of around Player's Handbook, DMG, Monster Manual. It seems like he did a lot, and there's probably an editor in there and stuff, but it seems mostly him. Whereas I think later in that period of time, that there's like
authors. Yeah, he was working on the D&D cartoon. He was busy with the company. He was a larger than life figure who was being pulled in a lot of directions at once, and had his hands in a lot of things at once. And so I think that he probably lacked the time or the energy to completely devote himself to an Unearthed Arcana, or say the as you said, the Oriental Adventures, which was mostly done by Zeb Cook. He definitely started to work in that capacity. So I think myself working for him developing Castle Zagig was probably similar to those processes that were going on then. Something that he was familiar with, but he had sort of returned to his old ways of the 70s and early 80s, because the Legendary Adventure stuff, he was writing every word of that and writing an immense amount of stuff. He was very passionate about it.
Very prolific too, like just in terms of what he could output. I was even thinking of like Dangerous Journeys. That's so dense, and you can see that that's very him. Like that right. To me I understand that there was an editor, but to me it seems like that was pretty much like him driving that thing. Yeah, just the kind of how prolific it is, just the amount that he was able to put out. Although speaking of that, I was going to say that you're quite prolific too, aren't you? Like you're able to.
Well, I don't know about being. I mean, I do write a lot of stuff, but when it comes to that level, he's in a class by himself, I believe.
So when you were writing some of that stuff with him, like what was the process once you had kind of turned something in? Like, was he quite hands-on in terms of the style, or, what was even included in locations?
He would present me with what he would call the Project Bible. And the Project Bible would be sort of an outline, and in that outline, there would be certain portions of it that he had already started to flesh out. And so I would expand on that, what he wrote. But he also told me throughout that process that I could just change things if I wanted to. And he would look at it after I changed it, that he was giving me the, permission to alter things as I saw fit. But then there were also parts of his outline that were just, 4 or 5 word phrase, and I would extrapolate from that and fit it into the whole and develop it on my own. So it was a combination of him being hands-on with certain segments of it and being hands-off with certain segments. And then I would turn things into him, and he would review them, and he would offer his commentary. Sometimes he would say, this is good. Other times he would tell me that, what the hell were you thinking there? Are you crazy? he didn't pull his punches, I remember like there was certain times when I first started and I thought like, oh my goodness, he hates me. He thinks my stuff is total crap. But it wasn't. It was just me sort of taking it personally when I really shouldn't. He was really just, telling me how he saw things.
Especially if it's creative too, right? Because
Right.
you're pouring your heart out into the stuff. I think the tendency to get offended is like higher. Whereas as you get a bit older, you're like, well, do they have a fair point? Like, are they being critical for the sake of it, or do they have is there kind of reason behind this? And so
Right, the legitimate points being made here. You have to kill your darlings. And one thing that I read, I don't remember who it was that said it, but it said remember that I am criticizing the art, not the artist.
I'm not sure which is worse.
I know.
That's and I think too, like going back to what we were saying before, like one of the draws of Hyperborea is the fact that there's an art to it. Like there's this like global narrative, and it's very kind of immersive. I was thinking of the box set in particular, where like I remember getting my hands on that and opening it up, and I was just thinking about this morning, but it feels almost like some person has managed to get into Hyperborea, and they've done these like studies, like character studies of these monsters and these like people that they've met, and like they've just managed to escape, and like that charcoal, those charcoal drawings, they're so like grim.
Piecing together of things that should not be pieced together.
Yeah, but to me that's like a very compelling. Like I think one of the reasons I quite liked it
That's nice to hear.
from the outset was that it had this very kind of like it was very much its own milieu. It's very much its own thing. Whereas some products are like, here's an idea, but you don't have to use it. It's quite tentative. Where I feel like Hyperborea is like, here you go. This is like, it's not saying you can't change things, but it's like, this is what I'm imagining. And if you like it, have at it and do your thing with it. And if you're not, that's fine, but this is what it is.
Right. That's exactly what I've done, because it kind of goes back to my original concept for the game, which was a game that I wanted to play with my beer drinking buddies. It was around 2008, 2009, after Gary's passing, and all my works with him were canceled by his widow. And I decided to create this game. When I was initially doing it, I had this sort of epiphany upon reading H.P. Lovecraft's Shadow Out of Time. And in Shadow Out of Time, they had what they called the Lovecraft Circle back in the Weird Tales days, in which Lovecraft exchanged letters with Smith and with Howard and August Derleth and all these different other writers of the day that wrote in the Weird Tales. And so Lovecraft really embraced that concept in Shadow Out of Time, because when he was relaying this man's experiences with this sort of body transferal thing from the great race to his humanity in these libraries that he visited, these alien libraries, there were all these references to the races of Smith's Hyperborea and Robert E. Howard's Cull of Volusia and Serpent folk there, and blending in some of his own other ideas, like from at the Mountains of Madness with the elder beings that were there. And I saw that that he himself was sort of creating this melting pot of these different fictional styles and flavors together. And I thought, wouldn't that be awesome to do that in a game? So when I was originally working on the rules for Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, I was talking to different people, and I heard from a number of parties that to write a game that had an implied setting throughout it and was linked to a setting would be a mistake. That it would serve me best to have a generic set of rules that could be tacked on to any setting. But I thought to myself, that's anything. Most games do this. Why not go full bore into merging the Weird Tales era of fiction with Gygaxian type rules and see where it goes? And I thought that I would be selling that same box set today, that it would, that I would sell one every couple of months maybe. And it would be like,
right. You still have the original print run sitting around
I thought
in
I'd still
garage.
have the original print run by now. I never thought that it would be successful, but it did better than I would have ever expected, to the point that I was able to, quit my day job back in 2016 and do this full time. It was a different approach to work in that kind of flavor and into the rules, but I still really like it, and I still look forward to my weekly game with my friends, running this game, running this setting, because really to me it's more about the setting than the rules.
It sounds like it was quite graduated. It wasn't like finish the work with Gary, quit my job, start a game company. There were steps along the way where that became possible. Had that been an ambition of yours?
I mean, it was always in the back of my mind, wouldn't this be cool if I could be successful doing this? Because I had already, I thought at one point, working for Gary, that I was going to be able to do that back then, that I was going, that I'm working for the, arguably the most famous person in tabletop role-playing games, that even though he wasn't enjoying the success of the early days of D&D, of course, but he was still to me an idol. And I thought back then, here I am, I'm working on the long-awaited Castle Greyhawk. Maybe I'll be able to do this as a career. And then the rug was pulled out from under me, sadly, after his passing. But at that point, I had sort of the attitude, and I suppose I still do to this day, that I didn't want to have a boss or someone that had the power to take, a few years of work and hundreds of thousands of words and just throw the trash on me.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want that to ever happen to me again. So how can I avoid this from ever happening to me? Well, it's to be my own man and do it myself.
Yeah, and I mean, for my own kind of perception of having written stuff that's been published, that would be like a crushing thing to me, like to have that much, put into something. So I can understand that, that desire to kind of do it your own way. I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but to me, it's quite incredible that you've sustained that for, is it more than 10 years now?
Yeah, well, we actually did 2 adventures before we actually published the game. So the first adventure was published in 2010. It was actually published even earlier than that in magazine format in 2009 in Knockspell magazine by Matt Finch of Swords and Wizardry fame. It was the Charnel Crypt of the Sightless Serpent, which we had as a short magazine article, and then the sort of
great
expanded
adventure as well.
Yeah,
having run that, it's a cool adventure.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And then did it as its own module, which we premiered at Gary Con 2 in 2010. And then we had another module called Taken from Dunwich, which was, on the surface, sounds like it could be Lovecraftian, but it does have a lot of Lovecraftian elements in it, but it sort of goes in its own way. It has a lot of Clark Ashton Smith in it as well. Then we had the that initial box set that you were talking about earlier in 2012 that we kickstarted it in. And that was my first Kickstarter too, so that was exciting at the time, and I got to make all the mistakes of the early pioneer days of Kickstarter and figure out how it all works.
Because you've done 3 editions at this stage, and I think in some ways, while they are very distinct and visually, it is much the same game. You could easily have a player's manual from the box set and use it with second, and I'm assuming that's the same with third. There's been tweaks, kind of quality of life tweaks and stuff along the way, and some quite big, quite substantial improvements along that period of time. And it's interesting because, visually, there's been quite a change. The identity of the setting has changed quite a lot, in the sense, with the first box set. Yeah, as I said, it's this, to me, it's this very kind of grim view of the world. Whereas I feel the last 2 editions have been quite colourful and vibrant, and kind of remind me of comic book. The covers especially remind me of comic book covers.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to show is that there can be different ways you can visualize Hyperborea. So in the initial box set, all the illustrations were by Ian Bagley, who does incredible work. and he primarily works in the medium of charcoal, and it really gives this gritty, dark feel to it. When I started to employ other freelance artists, we started to bring in different styles, including John Bingham, who lives in New Zealand like yourself, Del Tigler, and we brought in Val Simex, who really brought that sort of comic book feel that you were talking about, because he is a comic artist primarily, and he did the Conan the Barbarian comic book for a long time, which was what attracted me to check in with him and to see if he would be interested in doing some art for Hyperborea stuff. All these different artists and different styles, I like to think that they represent different ways that you could visualize Hyperborea.
I imagine too that might have been part of the decision to getting sort of freelance or other people involved with adventure writing and I guess collaborating in a way.
Yeah, for your viewers who may not realize it, you wrote the Anthropophagi of Zambala, which, like all of our adventure modules, don't just function as an adventure, but they function as an expansion of the setting itself. I hear back from a decent amount of people who have run your adventure, but the city itself that you developed there became a place, a home base for characters in adventuring parties, and they keep going back to it. So it becomes an important part of the campaign for them. I like to have that sort of expansion of setting material in the adventure. Each adventure takes some little portion of Hyperborea and expands it for the referee to use. And then, of course, the map is full of a lot of blank areas, the maps that we have of Hyperborea, in which the individual referee can, run an old, maybe an AD&D adventure there, or create their own stuff. There are towns that are unnamed, and people, so that referees could name that town and decide who lives there, what lives there, what the history may be.
For myself creatively, there's a limit to what I'm going to come up with. So I can imagine having more people to bounce ideas off can only be a good thing for a setting that's continuing to kind of grow and develop.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have a few trusted confidants who are enthusiasts of the game that I bounce ideas off of, and that's always very helpful to me.
But I was even thinking, like, people who have written adventures, like, it must be interesting seeing how other people, have kind of interpreted the setting. Because like you say, it's probably different for everyone. Everyone will have a slightly different take on how they interpret it.
I've seen some very interesting ideas come across, and I have 3 new adventures that we're going to be doing in early 2024 that have all been written, and each one of them is a different take on Hyperborea. Each author has their own style, and it's always, like you said, it's fascinating to see other people's takes on it. To a certain degree, I still look at content and I alter content, because there may be some things that are contrary to what has already been established with the setting. There may be just some things that I just don't agree with the direction that they're going. So I still try to let the individual authors explore their creativity, but I like to say that I keep it within the framework of what I've established for Hyperborea.
As is your prerogative as the boss. So you're talking about 3 new adventures that'll be presumably Kickstarter. That's kind of, and you've done 10 at this stage, 10 Kickstarters. This will be the 11th.
Wow, is it that many?
I think so.
I think it's been 10, and I'm gonna do 3 adventures at the same time. So they're all great adventures. The first one is The Vanishing Isles of the Summer King, and that's by Jonathan Bingham, who's been a longtime artist that I've worked with. I've been working with John since about 2010. He wrote this adventure. It has a beautiful cover by Val Simex, and that cover was colored by Jonathan's wife, Daisy Bingham. But then what's really cool about this adventure is that it's written by Jonathan Bingham, and all the interior illustrations are by Jonathan Bingham. So it's written and illustrated by the same guy. So that's great. Then we have The Thousand Eyes of Thaumagoria. That's by Ben Ball. Ben is known for doing his Beneath the Comet adventure for us in the past. And so it's great to have Ben back. Ben's a very active member of the community. He's great in our discussion forums that we have. He answers a lot of questions for people who are new to the game or may have, whether it's rules question or setting questions. He provides a lot of he's created a lot of great resources for the game that he posts for free for people to utilize in their games. So anyway, this one has a cover by Adrian Linderos, who's a young artist that I've recently started working with. And it has interiors by a whole host of artists, working with Phil Stone for the first time, who's a great artist. And then the next adventure is by one of my dear friends, Joe Macaron. It's the Oblation Slab of the Hepatomancer. Joe and I go way back to before I was working on this stuff. Joe was friends with Gary Gygax. He was a guy who helped me with some of the early development of Hyperborea when I was working out just a lot of the math and mechanics of things. He was someone that I bounced a lot of ideas off. He's been really great with me with that stuff over the years. He's been a great idea guy for me. So 3 new adventures, really excited about each of them because they each evoke a sort of different tone, a different feel, develop a different part of Hyperborea, just like your Zambala adventure did. Yeah, we're just really excited for people to see them. I've play tested certain portions of them at different conventions over the last couple of years. So they've been, some parts of them have already been experienced by different players from around the world, I suppose. Yeah, I think it's going to be a great campaign.
Yeah, nice. If someone didn't know anything about the game, what would be a reason for them to try it?
You know, it's funny because I have gotten a lot of, especially during COVID, got a lot of new people that were basically newbies to the game. And
that hadn't done role-playing games before?
Oh, not too much of that.
Right.
But most of the people that have come along can't come along from only have played 5e or Pathfinder.
Yeah, right.
And they wanted to try something different. And a lot of these people that have come along to Hyperborea have realized this whole different style of playing role-playing games because, let's face it, whether you like or don't like the games of today's era, there's no debating that the rules and the tone have changed so much over the years that the older style of play and the different classes, playing archetypes and not having every class be a la carte and built instead of character builds. Sort of exploring that archetypal play is new to them and it's exciting to them. I think that we get the reputation of a game like Hyperborea and its peers in the market would be suited only for a demographic of, people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. But it's not necessarily true. I had a younger guy in his 20s send me his audio files of him and his group playing one of our adventures. And it's a young group of guys. And yeah, they had to piece through some things. You can hear them at some point saying, how do you make a perception check in this game? And the young man running the game told them, well, you don't have to roll a perception check. You just tell me what you're looking for. Oh, okay. And then sort of light dawns and they figure out, this is how these types of older style games are played. I think that really it can be open to any demographic, that anyone who wants to play a game that you get to explore dungeons and wilderness and strange locales and have demons and otherworldly beings and have this sort of weird tales vibe, Savage sort of Conan, or whatever you want out of the game, that it's a fun alternative to some of the modern stuff that's out there.
Say you had only played 5e and you started playing this, I feel like it would be, because I'm in the camp where I could happily play either, but 5e, you've got certain ways of doing things. With old school games, you've got certain ways of doing things. And I think if you go between them, and it sort of opens your mind to possibilities. It's like quite refreshing to be able to visit something that does have a very strong implied set. It's not even an implied setting; it is the setting, and that's what the game is. To me, it still it feels very within the realm of D&D, but it's its own thing, and I think that change can be quite refreshing if
Sure.
you've only been picking up like Forgotten Realms material, or maybe you've run Curse of Strahd or something, the newest Curse of Strahd,
Right.
or something like that. Or, I would also say if someone's run like the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which to me, is taking those original adventures, the U series, and kind of translating it to 5e. If you enjoyed something like that, I imagine that you get a lot of enjoyment from something like Hyperborea. Even if you're running the first, like just U1, like that's such a good adventure.
Oh yeah, I loved it. I ran the hell out of that when I was young. We played that. I think I ran it for a couple of different neighborhood groups of kids. I just loved it so much. And then I think I was discussing this recently on one of the forums online, or it may have been on a Facebook post. Back in the day, in my computer science class, we had a project to make a sort of choose your own adventure project using code and BASIC.
Right. Yeah.
And so I wanted to make a Zork-like adventure from I don't know if you remember the text game of Zork, but yeah, it's one of the original no graphics game. It's it's almost like a choose your adventure on
kind of just like text.
Just text.
Yeah.
Yes. You have 3 choices of things that you do, and each one of them branches off from there. So I was sort of ripping off the whole haunted house theme of U1 and made a sort of my own choose your own adventure for a text-based game. I was in high school.
That house is so creepy though. I think I don't know, just everything about it's just I don't know why, but it just sort of works.
Right.
And what's the guy's Sam Ballett? Is that his name? The NPC that
yeah.
yeah.
And then you have the whole other stuff that's going on in the basement that shows that there's the piracy and everything.
Yeah. There's the crazed magic user as well, and so on that topic as well about people getting into the game. If what we've been talking about is interesting to people, what would you recommend as kind of an entry point to Hyperborea? Would it be picking up an adventure? Would it be, I don't know, grabbing some PDFs off Drive-Thru RPG?
If you're going to run the game, it's best to have the player's manual and the referee's manual, whether that's in electronic format or print format. But then if you were just jumping off to start running the game, the 3 adventures that I usually recommend are Your Adventure, the Anthropophagi of Zambala, or we have Rats in the Walls. It has 3 adventures in it. Each one is a short, low-level adventure, including the title adventure, Rats in the Walls, which is inspired by it's inspired by the H.P. Lovecraft story. So that's a good one because it's a bunch of short little adventures. And then our most recently published adventure by David Prada, it's called The Late Trapper's Lament, and that's also a nice low-level entry for first and second level characters. And each one of those really has its own unique flavor and style to it, because in the Rats in the Walls, when you're in the streets of Khromarium, which is the largest city in the realm, it's sort of a melting pot of the different races of Hyperborea in Khromarium. It's people primarily worship Sathagwa, the toad god, and it's chaotic by nature, and it does have law, but justice is rarely served with any type of consistency. And so it's a dark, seedy city that is built upon the foundations of the elder race of the original Hyperboreans who lived there before the plague known as the Green Death wiped out everyone, and it was left a lifeless husk at one point, until barbarians roamed into there and started to rebuild civilization, and then the barbarians became the civilized ones again. It's sort of this endless cycle of barbarism versus civilization, like Robert E. Howard likes to explore in his stories. It's nice to have that trio of little short adventures in Khromarium. Khromarium is something that I've been working on as a city supplement for some time now, and it's probably going to be the next project that I do after these 3 new adventure modules. So then we have Your City, that is of Zambala, that's it's near the city-state of Euthorium, which is ruled by a witch queen. And so the people in that sort of desert region, they have a completely different lifestyle than, say, the people of Khromarium would. And then the Late Trapper's Lament involves a sort of sea journey to this isle that is primarily populated by Vikings, and it's sort of an investigation type low-level adventure. So I guess it would all depend on what you would want to do to start running your Hyperborea. And of course, you could always just, if you're a referee and you're interested in running the game, you could look at the referee's manual. We have a gazetteer of the realm in the back of the book, and it has all these different lands and explains these different peoples that populate these different lands. And you might see something and say, you know what, I'd like to write my own little dungeon adventure in this area, or use some other, published module from the past and run with that. So it's really open to however you would want to do it.
So either basically pick up an low-level adventure, have a look at that, see if the flavor of that kind of aligns with what you're after, or go all in, get the core rule books, and, have at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. There's a good kind of community around Hyperborea too. There's the a while ago there were the forums, and then I understand you've also got a Discord. Are those kind of the main?
Yeah.
If you were wanting to learn more about it, get plugged into kind of the community and have people kind of give you some tips, or just have a space to ask questions, is that the best way to?
Yeah, I would say so, because there, especially the Discord has a lot of very active people who are just on Discord all day. Probably because they work on a computer all day and they keep it probably running in the background. But also our forums are a great place to ask questions. People post all kinds of great stuff. They post inspirational art, inspirational fiction that they're reading. People share stories about their campaign. People pitch ideas on some of their house rules or new classes that they may have come up with to use in the game. People may have rules questions or look for some clarity on something. And it's great because I can log on to, say, the Discord server, and someone may have a question about something that, I probably worded vaguely in the game that probably could have been worded better. And 3 or 4 people will chime in and answer the question for them because they're longtime players of the game and they have figured out, what it should be or how it should run. And so it's a nice little community of very helpful people. Nice.
And I guess we could put some links down as well, and if people are interested in checking it out, they'd be able to do that. Where do you see Hyperborea as a game, as a setting, and so forth? Where do you see that progressing in the future? So you've talked about the adventures, you've talked about the Khromarium. I presume that's coming out as a book or like a...
Yeah. I haven't actually decided the format, if it would be a book or a box set. I guess it all depends. I'm gonna see how the project sort of unfolds, and I'm going to have to decide from there. But if I do a box set, it's going to be the first time I've done a box set since the original game.
Yeah.
Which would be exciting.
Kind of feels a bit full circle, maybe.
Yeah, it would be nice. So that's a possibility. And then beyond that is really my ultimate project is my personal mega dungeon, which is located in Mount Vermithidon. So it is, Mount Vermithidon is all points north on the Hyperborea map. It's at the very center of the realm. For those who may not be, familiar with the setting of Hyperborea, it sort of works as a polar plane. It's a flat Earth setting in which the seas sort of spill eternally off the edges of the world, and it has a central continent. And in the middle of that central continent is Mount Vermithidon, which is basically all points north. So no matter where you are in Hyperborea, whether you're on the mainland or one of the other many islands that populate it, Mount Vermithidon is north. I've been slowly putting together my notes upon notes for this mega dungeon, and it's really my pet projects that I hope to unleash one day. And so when you ask about the future of Hyperborea, that's really the one that I think about the most.
Yeah, right. So in kind of a high level sense, like so I guess you've got some specific projects that you're hoping to achieve, namely those 3 adventures, the Khromarium supplement, whatever form that ends up taking, and then the mega dungeon. But on kind of a high level sort of, in a high level sense, what would be your aspirations for the game?
Do you mean like within the setting itself, or do you mean like as a business?
Yeah, I suppose as a business, that interests me. Like what you would ultimately like. Is it kind of where you want it to be? Do you see?
No,
like,
I mean, I see things expanding. I've had a lot of people asking me about VTT and and if I would embrace it. And so I've been talking with the folks at Foundry, and it's a possibility that I may go in that direction and do a VTT version of the game. And because I do sympathize with the fact that a lot of us get older and we move for family and jobs and everything else, and then all of a sudden we don't have a gaming group anymore. Or sadly people move away, sadly people pass away, and all kinds of things happen in life in which you're no longer have the capability to play with, say, a weekly or even bi-weekly or monthly group. And so playing through a VTT for a lot of people is their only option. And it also presents a lot of interesting tools for people who enjoy using some of those tools as in play. I personally prefer sitting at a table with a group of people and using theater of the mind. But I can see where a lot of those tools are fun to use for folks. So I think that as a business for growth for Hyperborea, I would like to see the game go to one of these formats in addition to open up the possibility of more people playing, because there are a lot of people who have supported the game and have it on a shelf and regrettably can't play it because they just don't have people.
Yeah, and I suppose even in terms of, I was just thinking again about kind of newer audiences and stuff, that digital space is so big for gaming, especially where, people might live in an area where no one else plays the game, and, it might be, in some ways it might be less threatening as well to join an online game and sort of dip your toes in and see if it's for you, and, rather than trying to meet up in person with people you don't know because you don't, and so
Right.
So I think, there's a lot of possibilities there. I mean, for myself, I've run a few online games, and I've got some friends overseas and stuff, and it's like you, I'd prefer to sit at a table with some friends, but for me, that's been kind of cool with one of my friends who does live overseas to be able to run a game with people who live in New Zealand as well as him, who's who's kind of overseas, and be able to kind of spend virtual time together, and so I can see how that could be quite an important area to develop.
I think it definitely has great utility from a just a gameplay aspect to even social aspect.
I guess the other thing that's good about it too is, in terms of accessing rules, like it's one thing kind of looking through a rule book, but if you can access rules digitally, often that's quite fast. Like you could type in keywords and stuff like that, and
Right.
that side of it's quite convenient. As you've been talking, it's been kind of an interesting process where early on you were saying, as kind of, I guess as an aspiring writer, you were kind of questioning your ability at the time, and then having gone from that to then working with kind of one of the founders of the hobby, and then to getting to a point in your life where you thought, actually I want to pursue this a bit more seriously, like as my vocation, and me being kind of leading this myself.
Sure.
To where to where you've managed to create a successful company and have people playing your game. So I guess if someone was at that really early stage where they're like questioning if they're any good, they might be thinking about wanting to write or wanting to get into game design, what would you have any advice, or what would you suggest for that person?
It's hard to come up with something that doesn't sound cliche, but I really do believe that this is true. You have to do what you love, I think. So when I talked about with my initial creation of this game, I mentioned that I created the game that I wanted to play that I wanted to run for my beer drinking buddies. And that type of mindset, I think, is the best way to approach things, that you create the thing that you will enjoy doing. if you are, scrolling online looking for some type of untapped avenue that you could exploit and create something for, then it's really not, it's the process, I think, will never be natural or organic. I think that if you're trying to satisfy a certain audience or trying to create something for a specific demographic, that it just, it may prove to be an exercise in frustration. I don't think that covers all situations, because of course you can be an adult who wants to write children's books, say, for example, and maybe not reading children's books are your thing all the time, that you read far more complex stuff. It doesn't mean that you can't, but what I'm saying is you have to love what you do. And if you do, and you work hard at it, because the old axiom of 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration is true as well, because you can't just be a dreamer either. You have to dedicate yourself to putting the time in to actually do it. You have to have that discipline, discipline to say, I'm not going to look at my phone for 2 hours now. I'm going to write. I'm going to get something done. It doesn't always have to be from the beginning of the project. It could be somewhere in the middle of it, or it could be somewhere close to the end. It could be one part of the project that you're keen on doing that particular day. And you take this sort of step-by-step process, and I think that really anyone can do it.
How important is talent in that?
I don't know. I tend to think talent can be overrated. Yeah, there are some people who are frustratingly talented. I remember this. There was this kid when I was a freshman in high school, and I was in this advanced math class, and I had to work my ass off. And I would see this kid, and he was never paying attention. I would see him outside. He had long hair. He always wore metal shirts. He was always smoking butts, and he didn't seem to give a shit about anything. And he would come in, he would just ace everything. And I thought, how the hell does he do it? Is that talent? I don't know. It's just a natural proclivity to be successful at something that other people struggle at. It could be, but I still think that overall, I think that talent is overrated, and it's hard work that is where it's at, and passion is where it's at.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I mean, I think in your case, you've got talent with writing, but obviously you've applied that in. So if you were just talented at writing, that wouldn't be enough, because there's all these other parts of your business that you've had to work on, branding, marketing, just how you collaborate with people, how you grow visibility around the how to deliver successful Kickstarters. If you're good at writing, but you can't kind of deliver on time. Going back to what you were saying really early in the conversation about being able to, stick to deadlines and all of that. So, I agree. Maybe I think the hard work element of it.
There's different things you have to manage throughout the process if you want to be I guess if you're talking about the difference between running a small business, or if you want to just get into it as a freelancer and you just want to create something and pitch it to somebody else. I would say that might be the best route to go. It's what I did to start, but it doesn't mean it's the best for everybody. I'm not saying that, but I think that to sort of dip your toes into the freelance market as a writer and work with a few different publishers and see how they operate and see how they, what they advise to you and how their process is from the pitch to idea to the actual work to the editing to the layout to publication, to see that whole process unfold over the course of months and even over sometimes years. That can be a great experience, and you can take those experiences and maybe create your own business eventually.
Nice.
Well, there you have it. As always, see you in the next one.